All right, so welcome to Math 119-312. This is, I believe, our 19th lecture, and we are very fortunate today to have John Zerr, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Invesco's Americas business. He's also the President and the CEO of Invesco Canada Limited. And so I put up a little blurb about him as you were coming in. And really what I want to do is I want to give him an opportunity to say a few words about how his company has been dealing with the pandemic in the past and what's going on forward. And then as always, I will be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions or comments, just put them there and we will try to get to them all. So take it away.
Thanks, Stephen. And it's wonderful to be with you all. I understand you're experiencing one of your first days of full-on winter now. I hope that you all are snug and warm and safe. I thought I'd start by just telling you a little bit about Invesco before I jump into some of the challenges that we've experienced and how we're addressing them in terms of COVID-19. So first, a little bit about Invesco so you can put this all in context. Invesco is a global investment manager. And what I mean by that is that we manage money for institutions and for people all around the globe. We manage about $1.2 trillion in assets under management. About a third of that is for institutions. And when I say institutions, I mean pension plans, governments. So for example, sovereign wealth funds, endowments, much like Williams has an endowment. We help manage portions of endowments for institutions. But the bulk of our assets are managed for people, meaning the retail channel. And that's principally through vehicles like mutual funds, exchange-traded vehicles like ETFs, and those sorts of things. We don't do business directly with the public. We provide asset management products for the retail portion of our business through financial advisors. So here, think of registered investment advisors, broker-dealers, institutions that you might be aware of like Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, Raymond James, Charles Schwab, those sorts of institutions. We've got about 8,000 people around the globe, and we do business in 3 principal jurisdictions around the globe. We break it up by the Americas. That's our largest marketplace, and by that I mean it's principally Canada and the US. Then we have a region that we refer to as EMEA. That's Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. So it's both the UK and continental Europe make up the predominant bulk of the assets there. And then Asia Pac, Asia Pacific. We have a business in a joint venture with a Chinese institution onshore in China. And then we have an offshore business located in Hong Kong, where we serve clients throughout the Asia Pacific region. So that's a little bit about Invesco. And prior to COVID-19, we were a firm, most like every other firm, that worked principally from an office environment. And we have been dealing with the impacts of COVID-19 since late December, early January. I'm sorry, was there a question? No? Okay. And the experience that we've had is one that come March, we had all 8,000 of our employees working remotely from a home environment. And so if you think about that, we went from a period of working principally in an office environment, all 8,000 plus of our employees, to working all from home in a span of less than 10 weeks globally. The way that happened is it happened in a wave. It started in our Asia Pac region, where our offices began to close, and we had to send our employees home to work from home in Asia Pac. We had a little bit of a head start, and we learned a lot because our offices in Hong Kong, where our Asia Pac business is headquartered, actually had been working from home because of some of the political unrest that had been occurring in Hong Kong. And so we were getting fairly well practiced at doing that at a city level. Here in Houston, from a business continuity standpoint, we were well practiced at working from home because we deal with hurricanes here and we have a plan on how to do that. But COVID's really different because some of the plans that you have for business interruption, they typically are city-centered, and they often envision being able to move your people to a remote working environment where they're still together. Well, obviously with COVID, there are challenges that come up with that. So what I thought today is I'd just share with you the framework that we're using, not only to think about working from home, but how eventually we plan to get back to an office environment where we hope we will get into a world of a new normal. And that new normal and the whole COVID experience has taught us that it won't be anything like what we experienced pre-COVID. It'll be a very different office environment, and it'll have some financial implications for our firm. And it'll also have some cultural implications of how we work together and the things that we need to think about in a post-COVID environment. So I'm going to run through a number of slides that I think will be made available to you if you're interested. I'm going to do that very quickly. I don't expect you to read what's on the screen because there's a lot on each slide. But I'm just going to talk to some of the highlights here, and then hopefully get to a point where I can answer some of your questions, things that you might be curious about. So we developed a framework for moving out of the office. We were looking at certain metrics that would tell us when it would be appropriate to do that. Things, as I said, began in Asia Pac. They quickly accelerated to our EMEA region, and in the Americas, we went very quickly at a very accelerated pace from our office environment to a work from home environment across all of Invesco in a span of just 2 weeks. And one of the things that we're now focused on, since we've been working from home and we know we can do that, and I can, if you have questions about how did that all happen, I can address them. I thought it'd be more interesting to look forward of where are we now and how do we get back to our new normal environment. And so to be able to deal with this as a global company, we had to come up with a framework. And we came up with a framework of some guiding principles that we could apply globally, but allow for enough flexibility so that on a regional and on a city basis, specific basis, it still made sense, and that we could make decisions that actually made sense for our business at all three of those levels, at a regional level, at a global level, and at a very micro city specific level. On the slide that I'm showing you now are basically the principles, and not surprising, we are a people-based business. Our largest assets, where we make the most investment, is in our people, and so we want to make sure we keep them healthy and safe. So we've got that as our guiding North Star. We're obviously going to comply with government edicts, and so a state, local, municipal, provincial, or territorial authority says that we must do something, we'll do it. We're a business that needs to comply with local regulations. We're also going to be driven by science, however. So just because a local government authority may say that it's safe to reopen up, that doesn't mean we're going to do that. We're going to look at some metrics that I'll share with you that help guide our decisions of when it's actually prudent to begin a process of repopulating our offices. And as we developed our framework, we realized that every city is different, every region is different, and every one of our employees has some unique challenges. And we wanted to create a framework that addresses the unique circumstances that our employees might be experiencing. And the output of that is, as we start opening our offices, we made the decision that we're not going to tell anybody that they had to go back to an office environment. We decided that we're going to invite people back. And those people who are willing to come back and start working from an office environment would be welcomed to do that within certain parameters. And I'll go through those with you in a moment. At the end of the day, just like we always said, health, safety, and well-being of our employees is our #1 mission. As we begin to repopulate our offices, one thing that was really clear, if we really want to keep our people safe, we have to make sure that the office environment is a safe place for them to be. And that means doing things a lot more differently than we used to in the past in order to allow us to do that, whether it's cleaning regimes, the ability to social distance in an office, some of the requirements that we're going to ask our employees to comply with if they're going back to an office environment. And I'll touch on some of these. The next slide here is just a quick representation of how we're thinking about the eventual return to our offices. And we're thinking about it in waves. So currently, most of Invesco right now is still in a work from home environment. I'll show you in a few slides where some of our offices are actually open and in what we call the yellow phase, meaning that a good majority of our employees are back and working from an office environment. But for the most part, we're still in a work from home environment, and we're beginning to transition into what we call the orange phase. And that's a phase where we think it's prudent, based on the metrics that we look at, to begin to repopulate our office environment. But we're going to do that at a slow pace, meaning that we're never going to, in an orange phase, have more than 25% of our office population in an office present at any one time. And the reason for that is around 2 points. It's keeping people safe in order to be able to socially distance, and also resilience. It's the earliest phase of repopulation, meaning that we know there isn't a vaccine just yet, and that there may be risks to putting people together. And so we want to make sure that we're able to start recapturing the benefits of being back in an office environment, but do so in a safe and prudent way. And so as you move on this chart from the red all the way to the green, the percentage of people that would be in our office environment increases. One of the things you might notice on the green side is that we never get back to our 100%. And that's because we think COVID-19 has actually impacted our business in a way that in the future, we don't see having everybody back in the office the way we did before. And I can talk a little bit about that when we get to the economics around the implications of COVID. This next slide here is a slide that's meant to look at the metrics that we will use to help guide our decisions at a local level on reopening our offices. And so one of the things we did is we put together an entire structure and team, leveraging what we did on business continuity, to decide when it was prudent to open an office, and in order to make sure we had some global standards that made sense. We tried to capture them on this one slide. It's a busy slide, but I think if you were to take a look at the left-hand side of the slide, the things that we are focused on as we think about whether it's prudent to open our office and move to the orange phase, and then to the yellow phase, and then eventually to the green phase, are listed on there. And in the first part of it, it's, hey, what's happening with the virus generally in that local environment? We don't want to open an office unless we've got a trend line that the virus is under control. And we'll share with you some of the metrics that we look at in order to make that decision. We also want to know what's happened among our employee base. Even if the virus may be under control in a particular city, if there seems to be virus spread among our employees in that city, we want to make sure that that's a factor that we're considering. Government official guidance and restrictions, obviously, I mentioned we're going to comply with those, but we're not going to be driven to reopen an office just because a governmental authority says it's okay to do that. And then some of the other ones here are issues that are unique to different jurisdictions, such as are schools open? We have employees that are in various stages of their life cycle. Some have young kids, some have older kids, some are caring for others, whether it's parents or other elders. And we want to make sure that we're sensitive to all of those factors. Our offices are in different locations. In some cities, we have our employees very reliant on public transportation, and in other cities, much less so. So here in my own city of Houston, most of our employees drive to work, but in cities like New York, in Hong Kong, in Tokyo, where we have offices, and in London, our employees are much more reliant on public transportation, and it's one of the factors that we'll look at and think about in terms of deciding whether to open an office or not. Okay, I mentioned that there are metrics that we look at, and that we created a number of organizations leveraging our business continuity efforts to help us track this. And I guess the headline here is COVID is taking up a lot of time and effort of a good percentage of our employees who never had to deal with this before in terms of helping us manage through this. So at the global level, we've got a group that we call the Return to Office Task Force, or RETRO. And that's the group that's put together these global guiding principles. We track on a regional basis and a global basis how we're doing, which offices are open, which aren't, what our experience has been. And then we also seek to manage this at a much more regional level, and then ultimately at a local level. And so we have groups of people who are tasked with managing our return to office and dealing with COVID at a regional level. That's that middle box of the triangle. And then we have at each city a group that we call the emergency management team that typically deals with snowstorms, power outages, and hurricanes, and those sorts of things that are now focused on dealing with COVID-19. And the purpose of this slide is just to basically say that for a global company, the virus has impacts at each one of these levels, and impacts our cities in different ways at different times. I'm going to go quickly through these slides. What this is meant to show you is a snapshot of all of our offices in the different regions and what their status is in that red, orange, yellow, and green phase that I showed you earlier in the deck. And what you can see here is that in Asia Pac, we have a number of offices that are in that yellow phase, meaning that we've got somewhere between 50 and 75% of our colleagues back in an office environment. Now, this is a snapshot. What I'll tell you is that these change very dynamically. It's very fluid. And just because an office has gone from a yellow, from a red to an orange to a yellow phase, doesn't mean that it's a linear progression towards green. In many events, we've had to go back to a work from home environment. And I think if you've been reading the press and what's happening in Europe, and I'll turn to that slide, what you would now know is that Europe is going through another lockdown, which has meant that the phases that you see here for our offices across Europe, if I showed you a current slide, every one of these offices would now be in the red phase, meaning that everybody in Europe that was working from an office environment, we've sent everyone home again because of the spread of the virus and governmental mandates. In North America, we are at the very beginnings of opening our offices. And here what you see on this slide is a list of our offices and what their planned reopening dates are. Today, we only have a handful of offices open in the US, nothing in Canada. Our Dallas office is open. Our Charlottetown, actually I misspoke, Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island is open. That's an office that we have actually the least concerned about the COVID virus spreading in. But our office in Austin is open, and we are about to open our office in New York City in downtown Manhattan on Monday. If you were to look at some of the dates here, what I would tell you is that this slide too is dynamic, and a lot of these dates have shifted out more towards the future, just given what we're experiencing in terms of the virus spread here in the US. So let me shift a little bit to the metrics that we look at and some of the challenges that we experience when we say we want to be metrics driven. Across the top of the page here, you can see the kinds of things that we look at, which are, how many new cases are there in a particular city? What's the rate of change in those cases? What's that? How do we levelize that and think about it on an apples to apples basis in terms of new cases per 100,000, and what's the rate of change? How many deaths have been in that city, and what's the fatality rate? We also look at hospital bed capacity and the availability of intensive care unit beds when we think about opening an office, or we think about having to reduce the population that we might have in an office that's already open. And these are the things that we look at when we go through that process. The challenge here is that the data that we want to look at isn't uniformly available. And so to try to be data driven and try to be as uniform as we can across a region is often very challenging. So the kinds of information that I have available here in Houston differ from the kinds of information that I might be able to receive from some of our offices in California or in New York. And that means that in many ways, the framework that we've got, which is metrics driven, has to have, by definition, a big level of subjectivity built into it. On this next page, I'm just showing you the kinds of data that we look at. And here's a snapshot for what our colleagues at a very local level would look at on a weekly basis in determining whether or not it's prudent to begin the process of reopening an office or moving to the next phase of reopening. It's in microtype, so I don't expect you to see it. The point being is the data is available. It tends to be highly heterogeneous by city, and that's what makes it challenging. So let me just tell you a little bit about the financial implications of dealing with COVID. So at the very beginning, one of the things that we experienced as we needed to send people home to work from home is that we spent a lot more money on IT types of things and home work environment things than we had budgeted for. Makes a lot of sense. If you're going to send somebody home to work from home, they need to be able to connect to our network. They need to be able to replicate the kind of work they did in an office environment. And so if you think about a trader, for example, who typically has 3 or 4 screens on her or his desk, at home, people typically only have 1 monitor. And so we started buying monitors like crazy for people. We needed to buy lots of laptops. We needed to make sure that people weren't sitting on their dining room chairs for 8 hours a day and had a proper chair at their home office. And so the point here is that our technology spend on hardware and things like that really ticked up rather dramatically. On the other side of it, however, since we had to retreat to our homes and we're all sent to our rooms, spending on other things actually really dropped off a cliff. And so we had, on a net basis, a lot of savings from an operating standpoint. So money that we would spend on travel and entertainment, client engagements, really stopped. And we experienced a good deal of savings in that area. We had to reinvest in the ability to connect, just like we're connecting with you today in a virtual environment. So we had to learn how to do things differently. But I think the headline here is that for a company like ours, where we had been very used to meeting with our clients in person and spending a lot of money to do that, in a post-COVID environment, we're rethinking that. And we're rethinking that because in many instances, our clients have gotten used to working in a virtual environment with virtual engagements, and they actually prefer that. It increases their productivity, and it also increases our own. And so on a go-forward basis, we see some savings for the organization like this. We won't have no travel, and we won't have no spending on entertainment and client engagements, but it'll be much less than what we had in a pre-COVID environment. So the new normal, meaning at some point, there will be a vaccine, or we will be at a point where people will feel comfortable, and we believe it'll be prudent to start really bringing the population levels of our offices back up. But it'll be different. At least right now, if you were to come to an office that's open, an Invesco office right now that's in the, say, orange phase, we would be asking you before you came to the office to take your temperature. We would require that when you come into the office that you would wear a mask, that you would follow the one-way hallways that we've developed, that you would maintain social distance in the office, and that you would have to deal with some inconveniences, such as the fact that we're going to limit the number of people that can get into an elevator. And so your normal commuting time up to your office is going to take longer because the elevators can't be so densely populated. Things like gathering with your colleagues that we used to do in big conference rooms, well, we need to make sure that we're able to do that in a socially distanced way. And so larger gatherings are more limited. So COVID has impacted us today, and we expect that in the go forward environment, one of the things that we're going to see is that there will be a portion of our employees that have gotten very used to working from home, are very productive, are still able to do a good job for our clients, and that while we used to be a firm that worked almost exclusively from an office environment, except for our sales people, that a good portion of our population may start working from home or work from home at least several days out of the week, and that our need for the same square footage in our offices is going to change. And the kind of space that we have in our offices will need to change. We'll need larger gathering spaces and fewer offices and those sorts of things. And so the long-term impact of COVID is pretty dramatic. And we think it'll impact us ultimately in a way that will allow us to save some money in areas that we previously had to spend rather heavily in. So I'm going to stop there and Steve, turn it back to you to see if there are any questions from your students. I know I've blown through these slides very quickly. Stephen, I think you're making them available for everybody if they're
yes, and in fact, I've already emailed them to the students so that they can zoom in on them right now. Sure. So we've got 3 questions in the chat, but before we go to that, if you could go back to your slide where you had the operating expenses. I just had one quick question as to, is there a reason July was so much higher?
Yes, and so if you think about the various regions that we operate in and the way in which the virus has affected those regions, it first closed down Asia Pac, it then closed down EMEA, it then closed down our offices and our operations in the Americas. And it's worked on exactly that same cadence in terms of reopening, and our ability to start traveling and engaging with clients is the same way. So what you're seeing in July and June is the beginnings of our reopening our offices and re-engaging with clients in Asia Pac.
Okay.
And the beginnings of that in EMEA, although that was not long lasting. We still are in EMEA not permitting people to travel on airplanes for business. We do in Asia Pac. And that's what you're seeing here is the resurgence of some of the travel expense.
Okay, thank you. So our first question is let's see. Don't lose the very first line of it. At least in the US, did you feel compelled to make tougher decisions due to the lack of response from the federal government or state government? Tougher decisions in terms of what to do with your employees, for example?
I won't say the lack of a coordinated government response exacerbated our need to be really proactive. So I guess the answer in some ways is yes. We were still guided by the same metrics. The availability of the data at that point was much less widespread. And so we needed to rely on the judgment of the emergency management team chairman in each one of our cities. I chair our regional effort, which coordinates each of our cities in the Americas. I also sit on our global coordinating body. And so what we needed to do before we actually closed down our offices in the Americas is we needed to actually run a couple stress tests to make sure that we were able, from a system standpoint, to have everybody work remotely. And we had to do those tests in a very short period of time of fewer than 10 days. So we started with a 50% load of sending half of the people back. And then we did a 80% load test. And after we were confident that we could work from a home environment, we then said, everybody home. And that was mid-March.
Thanks. So our second question is, are the lower levels but essential office workers, say office cleaners or security guards, company employees or obtained from contractors?
So we have migrated from a in-source model to an outsourced model. So we do outsource our cleaning and our facilities to an outside vendor, and we do different vendors in each city and in different regions. But we have our own facilities people that oversee that and that are present in our offices. Because we are a technology reliant company, we have lots of needs for servers and that sort of thing. We also have a large IT presence in our offices, even during the work from home phase. And so here in Houston, it's a large operations center. We have about 1,400 people, but we have about I'd say 20 to 21 people in our offices on a daily basis, making sure that all of the servers are administered and taking care of IT needs. So it's a little bit of both.
Thanks. The next question is, how are you thinking about sick time? Employees tend to come in sick to not use PTO. So how do you change incentives but manage productivity?
So what we've said is you can't come into the office if you're sick. And we have just eliminated tracking of sick time. What we've said is that your health matters. And it's not only important to you, but it's also important to your colleagues. So if you're not feeling well, don't come into the office. And until we get through this COVID environment, it's something that we're not tracking anymore.
So I serve on a regional school committee, and it's not clear, but I think we'll be able to use any snow day as just a day of remote instruction and not call it as a canceled class. But it's interesting, you know, what procedures and permissions we need to go through to make any changes like that with the contracts that are outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions I have is, have you hired many people to deal with the COVID issues across the company? Or is this being done by people already employed?
So it has principally been addressed by people who've been here since it came on rather quickly. We have a rather robust business continuity effort, and we have a rather robust security team. That security team focused principally on cybersecurity and less on physical security, but they've taken on and ramped up our physical security efforts in the COVID environment, and they work together with our facilities team to help us manage this on the ground. And so the only dedicated COVID hire that we have is a physician, a specialist in infectious disease that we've retained to help us with our metrics and to provide advice to us as we go through the process of our reopening and the decision-making of when to actually close an office and roll back to a work from home environment.
And then, you know, given, you know, conservation of hours in the day, given that so many people are now dealing with COVID, have you hired other people to take some of the workload off of the people who are dealing with all of your COVID issues?
We haven't, and I think that leads to one of the areas that we're really monitoring and mindful of. What we've seen is there's actually been a spike in productivity.
Mm-hmm.
The company has been extremely resilient, and our folks have rallied. And I think there was an adrenaline rush initially. Everybody expected this to only last, several months, and here we are. It's now almost November. And that productivity, while it's still high, the biggest concern that we have right now is burnout and fatigue, and the ability to help our folks create some separation between work and home life. Because if you're working at home, that monitor is always there. You're always getting emails, you're always getting texts, and helping our people managers be aware of that and manage that burnout fatigue is something that we're really focused on, and trying to encourage people to actually take time off is one of the things that is at the top of our list. It's hard right now. People don't want to take time off if they can't travel or do something that's outside of the four walls of their home. And so what we've also done is we've suspended tracking vacation time. What we really want to focus on is the well-being of our employees, and we've said, look, don't let that be something that discourages you from taking time off and unplugging, because you need to do that or else you'll burn out.
And then somewhat related, the next question is, have some workers not been able to remain productive under the distractions of work from home?
Yes, I think the challenges impact different employees in different ways. Caregivers, whether it's people that are looking after kids at home or elders in the family, have challenges that are other employees that who don't have those responsibilities. And we're very focused on that. We've created a focus group on parents and caregivers to make sure that we understand their needs and that we're providing the flexibility that those folks need. One of the largest challenges is schools. When schools are either in a virtual environment or closed, the pressure that puts on caregivers is very high, and creating flexibility in their schedules is really important.
And the next question is, do you think pandemics are part of the future? Does that change how you will use real estate around the world? Does it change how you think about where to locate areas with high-speed internet, for example? So that eliminates Williamstown.
We've learned a lot from this pandemic, and the short answer is yes, this changes everything. We had fewer than 10% of our employees working remotely prior to pandemic. Most of those were sales folks. In a future work environment, I think that number goes much higher. I don't want to speculate right now how, what level. I think it'll differ by region. So our real estate needs are going to be impacted by that. The kind of office and the kind of setup that we need within the office will be impacted by that. Our location strategy is also impacted by that. We had a very firm view on our location strategy, where we wanted to locate our investment teams, where we wanted to locate our marketing and sales organizations. And that limited the talent pool. I think what this has taught us is that we are able to be very effective in a virtual environment, and where someone is at any particular moment matters less. And so as we're thinking about this, our ability to focus on topics like diversity, talent acquisition, I think get broadened as a result of our ability to think more broadly about where people live versus where they work in our office environment.
And related to that, a lot of times companies have good relations with the local communities. Do you see that changing significantly as you adopt such a strategy?
I don't think so. I think we tend in some of our cities to be a very large employer. So for example, in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, we are the single largest private employer on the island. I don't see that changing, even if a portion of our employees in PEI start working remotely. In a city like Houston, where we're a significant employer, but by no means do we have the scale that some of the energy companies. I don't see that changing at all. The cities where we are in smaller towns and have a large footprint. So, for example, Henley on Thames in the UK, we're the largest employer in that region. I again don't see that changing in the near term, even if a percentage of our employees that now commute daily from the city out to Henley start working remotely.
Then the next question is, could you comment on changes experienced by your customers in dealing with you? Are they asking for different services? Do they consume different products at different rates?
Their engagement with us has been radically transformed. In the past, human interaction, one-on-one, was the predominant form of engagement. But our clients are going through the same journey that we are. And I think they're experiencing the same things that we're experiencing, meaning that technology has enabled us to achieve virtually the same goals that we wanted to achieve in a in-person environment through a virtual environment. It's not perfect, but that has led our clients to seek to engage with us more virtually because it's more productive for them as well. And so retooling, making sure we have the right equipment, tools, technology, and capabilities to engage with our clients in the way they want to engage with us is a priority. And then teaching our employees how to engage effectively in a virtual environment is also top order of the day.
And then related to that, are you finding any differences in the interactions with people who have worked with you for a long time versus new clients?
So one of our concerns going into this was the ability to onboard and attract new clients, where and specifically in the institutional space, where the sales cycle is rather long and protracted, and intermediaries are involved. So there are institutional pension plan and institutional consultants that are heavily involved in that process. And our concern was that our productivity would fall off because of our inability to engage with them in a way in which we historically had. And what we found is that's not the case, and that we actually have been effective in attracting new clients and engaging with clients in this virtual environment because they don't have a choice either. So I think the short answer is no, everybody is adapting. When we get to a world where there is widespread availability of a vaccine and the vaccine has significant efficacy, we'll see if that changes. My bet is learnings and some of the ways of dealing with our clients and our clients dealing with us will remain virtual just because it's more efficient.
And then the final question of the day is flagged with a trigger that this is an odd question, although I think it's actually a very interesting one. Do salespeople still feel they need to wear business clothes when communicating with clients virtually? And I'll add to that, do salespeople want to wear business clothes? Does it make them feel more like at work?
It's not an odd question at all. And in fact, it's one of the questions that our HR folks are wrestling with. And so in the beginning, everything went virtual. So our board meetings became virtual. And the first board meeting, everyone still showed up with a suit and tie on, even though we were behind screens. And our chair said, well, this seems rather silly. Let's ditch the jackets and ties. And I think what we've found is that our interactions with clients have become much more casual business attire rather than formal attire. Now, we still have people, our market strategists that appear on CNBC and Bloomberg and in the media. And what we do ask when they are appearing on television and on broadcast media that they still wear a suit and tie. But both our clients and we in interactions where most people would have worn a suit, that's now become business casual.
And do you think it's going to become business casual as people return to work in person?
I think there's very little way of turning back the clock. I think I do believe we will be in a much more casual environment in the future. I think board meetings, however, will still go back to suits and ties. Finals presentations will still go back to suits and ties, but the more preliminary interactions will be more casual dress.
Anyways, thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us.
My pleasure, Stephen. I hope this was helpful in some small way.
Absolutely. It's really interesting to see how different organizations and different agencies are dealing with the same problems in terms of how things are changing and what you're going to use to make the decisions going forward. And one of the speakers we had before you was the president of Williams, who was talking about, here is the metrics we have, but none of this is locked in place. And we have groups of people who will be evaluating and using this as information to make decisions. Whereas on the school committee I serve, we had negotiations with unions and everything has to be locked down and spelled out explicitly. If this happens, this happens.
What we found is that subjective judgment is required. And to put it on autopilot, I think you don't get the optimal result.
Yes, and hoping to move things away from autopilot to a conversation where everybody's at the table. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.